I always told my students that silence speaks louder than words. I never imagined I'd spend my final years proving that theory in a place where silence is all anyone hears. My name is Margaret Eleanor Hayes. I'm 72 years old, and for 43 years, I taught English literature at Riverside High School in a small town outside of Portland, Oregon. I taught Steinbeck and Fitzgerald, Shakespeare and Morrison. I taught comma splices and dangling modifiers. But mostly, I taught young people how to find their voices, how to speak their truths, how to stand tall even when the world tried to make them small. I was good at it. Better than good. I won Teacher of the Year 3 times. I had letters from former students telling me I changed their lives. I kept every single one in a shoebox under my bed, tied with a blue ribbon. That shoebox is still there, I suppose. In my old house. The one with the garden I planted 30 years ago and the porch swing my husband built the summer before he died. The house where I raised my children. The house I thought I'd die in. But I'm not there anymore. I'm here. In Harmony Hills Senior Living Center, room 237. The room that smells like industrial cleaner and boiled vegetables no matter how many lavender sachets I hang from the curtain rods. The room with pale yellow walls and a window that overlooks the parking lot. The room where I've lived, for 14 months and 6 days, though it feels like much longer. Time moves differently here. Minutes stretch like taffy while weeks disappear like morning fog. They call it a senior living center. But let's be honest about what it is. It's a nursing home. A place where families put people they don't want to think about anymore. A place where the living wait to stop living. Oh, it's nice enough as far as these places go. Clean, well-staffed. The food is edible if you don't think too hard about what you're eating. There's a rec room with a big television that's always too loud, and a library with books nobody reads, and a courtyard with benches arranged around a fountain that hasn't worked since I arrived. I'm not supposed to be bitter about it, that's what everyone tells me. The staff, the visiting chaplain, the cheerful young woman who teaches chair yoga on Tuesdays. They tell me I should be grateful, grateful for the care, grateful for the safety, grateful that my children loved me enough to find me such a nice place. But here's what nobody tells you about gratitude. It's hard to feel grateful when you're invisible. I came here in September of 2024, 14 months ago. My daughter Patricia made the arrangements. She's the oldest, the responsible one, the one who always did everything by the book. She sat me down in my kitchen, in the house where I'd lived for 47 years, and she told me it was time. She used words like practical and sensible and your own good. She talked about my medication schedule and the stairs in my house, and what would happen if I fell. She had pamphlets, she had statistics. She had already toured 3 facilities and chosen this one because it had the best online reviews. I didn't fight her. Maybe I should have. But I was tired. I'd been tired since Robert died, since the funeral, since I woke up every morning in our bed, and remembered all over again that I was alone. Patricia said I'd be safer here. She said I wouldn't be lonely because there would be people around all the time. She said she and her siblings would visit often. She didn't lie exactly. There are people around all the time, just not the people who matter. My son James came to the move-in day. He carried boxes and made jokes and told me how great the place looked. My youngest, Daniel, sent flowers with a card that said "New adventures ahead," with a smiley face. Patricia stayed for 3 hours that first day, helping me arrange my things, hanging my pictures, setting up my books on the small shelf by the window. She cried when she left, real tears. I believed them. For the first month, they came regularly. Patricia every Sunday with her family. James once or twice a week, always in a hurry but always stopping by. Daniel called every few days, his voice bright and busy from San Francisco where he worked in tech, doing something I never quite understood. I told myself this was my new normal. This was what my life looked like now, different but okay, manageable. And then, gradually, like a sunset you don't notice until it's already dark, the visits stopped. It didn't happen all at once. That would have been too obvious, too cruel. Instead, it happened in increments. Patricia's Sunday visits became every other Sunday, then once a month. James started texting instead of visiting, quick messages saying he was swamped at work, he'd come by soon, he promised. Daniel's phone calls grew shorter and further apart. By Christmas I saw them all together for about 2 hours. They brought gifts, they took photos, they posted them on Facebook with captions about family and love and blessed moments. Then they left. January came. February, March. The visits became rare enough that I started marking them on my calendar like special occasions. April 10th, Patricia stopped by for 20 minutes. May 3rd, James brought his kids but stayed in the car, sent them in alone. They were sweet children but uncomfortable, fidgeting in the doorway, not knowing what to say to a grandmother they barely knew anymore. By summer, I realized the truth. I had been set aside, shelved like a book that had been read and no longer interested anyone. My children had lives, and I was no longer part of them. I was the obligation they couldn't quite meet, the guilt they carried but didn't act on, the phone call they meant to make but never did. I didn't tell anyone. Not the nurses who asked cheerfully about my family, not the other residents who shared stories about their grandchildren's visits. I smiled. I said everyone was busy. I said they called all the time. I became very good at lying. But lying to others is easy, lying to yourself is harder. I tried to understand, I really did. Patricia has 3 children, a demanding job, a husband who travels. James works 60-hour weeks managing a restaurant. Daniel lives 2,000 miles away with his own young family. They're busy, they're overwhelmed, they're doing their best. These are the things I told myself on the nights when I couldn't sleep, when the silence in my room felt like it had weight, pressing down on my chest until I couldn't breathe. But understanding doesn't make it hurt less. Here's what I've learned about abandonment. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't send a letter or make a phone call. It just happens, slowly, until one day you look up and realize you're completely alone, and you can't quite remember when that started, or why you didn't see it coming. I was a good mother. I know I was. I was present. I was involved. I went to every soccer game, every school play, every parent-teacher conference. I helped with homework. I drove carpool. I made Halloween costumes by hand and birthday cakes from scratch. When Robert died, when my whole world shattered, I still showed up for them. I still packed lunches and asked about their days and pretended I wasn't drowning in grief. I worked full-time and kept our house running and made sure they never doubted they were loved. And they were loved. God, they were so loved. So what happened? When did I become disposable? When did my love stop mattering? When did they decide that the woman who gave them everything deserved nothing in return? I've thought about it constantly, in the early morning hours when the medication cart rattles down the hallway, during lunch when I sit at my assigned table with 3 other women who talk about their family's visits while I push green beans around my plate. In the evening when I hear other residents' doors opening, voices in the hallway, laughter, life happening just outside my room while I sit alone. I've considered every possibility. Maybe I was too strict when they were young. Maybe I expected too much. Maybe I said something, did something, failed at something in a way that poisoned their love for me. Maybe I'm remembering our relationship differently than it actually was. Maybe they never loved me as much as I loved them. Maybe I was always alone and just didn't know it. Or maybe they're just like everyone else, busy, distracted, caught up in their own lives. Maybe I'm not special to them anymore, not necessary, not worth the drive across town or the uncomfortable small talk, or the reminder that someday they'll be old too, sitting in rooms like this waiting for visitors who never come. I don't know which possibility is worse. The staff here is kind, they really are. They check on me regularly, they bring my medications and help me with things I can still do myself but they're paid to help with anyway. They call me Mrs. Hayes in voices that are always a little too cheerful, a little too loud, like I'm not just old but also deaf and simple. They don't mean to be condescending. They've just learned that most residents here need to be treated like children. Most residents here have given up. I haven't given up, not yet, but I'm getting close. There's a woman here named Dorothy who lives 3 doors down. She's 84, sharp as a tack, mean as a snake. I like her. She doesn't pretend to be happy about being here. She doesn't make small talk or play bingo or attend the sing-alongs in the rec room. She sits in the courtyard most afternoons, smoking cigarettes she's not supposed to have, reading mystery novels, scowling at anyone who tries to engage her in conversation. We started talking one day in October. I'd taken to sitting outside in the mornings, when the air was cool and the parking lot was quiet, and I could pretend I was somewhere else. Dorothy was in her usual spot, and when I walked past, she looked up from her book and said, "You're the English teacher, right? The one whose kids don't visit?" I should have been offended. Instead, I laughed. It was the first honest thing anyone had said to me in months. "That's right," I said. "Mine either," she said, lighting a cigarette. "Got 2 sons, both lawyers, very important, very busy. Can't be bothered with an old woman who might die and make them feel guilty. At least they'd feel guilty," I said. "Don't count on it," Dorothy said. "Guilt requires a conscience. We've been friends since, if you can call it friendship. Mostly we sit in silence, her reading, me thinking. Sometimes we talk. She tells me about her life before this place. She was a secretary for 40 years, never married, raised her sons alone after their father left. She saved every penny to put them through college. They both became successful. They both forgot where they came from. The thing nobody tells you," Dorothy said once, "is that children don't owe you anything. You can give them everything. Your time, your money, your whole life. But they don't owe you love. They don't owe you loyalty. They don't owe you a damn thing." "That's bleak," I said. "That's honest," she said. "I think about that a lot. About what we're owed and what we're not. About the invisible contracts we think we have with the people we love. I gave them life. I raised them. I sacrificed for them. Doesn't that mean something? Doesn't that create an obligation? But maybe Dorothy's right. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe love is supposed to be unconditional, which means by definition it can't come with expectations. Maybe I failed because I expected gratitude, expected reciprocation, expected them to love me the way I loved them. Or maybe I'm trying to excuse the inexcusable. Maybe abandoning your elderly parent in a nursing home and visiting once every few months is simply wrong, regardless of how busy you are, regardless of your own family obligations. Maybe there's no philosophical framework that makes it okay. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. What I do know is that I wake up every morning in this room, and I go through the motions of my day, and I wait for something to change even though I know it won't. I know this schedule by heart now. Breakfast at 7:30, medication at 9, activity hour at 10, which I skip, lunch at noon, rest time at 1, another activity at 3, dinner at 5, evening medication at 7, lights out at 9, though no one enforces that and most of us lie awake for hours anyway. The days blur together. Monday feels like Thursday, feels like Saturday. Sometimes I forget what month it is. Sometimes I forget why I'm here. Then I remember, and the weight settles back over me, heavy and familiar. I still read. I've always been a reader, and that hasn't changed. I work my way through the meager library here, books donated by families cleaning out their deceased parents' belongings. I find myself drawn to stories about resilience, about people who survive impossible things. I'm not sure if it helps or makes things worse. I also write. I've kept a journal since I was 16 years old. Dozens of notebooks filled with observations, reflections, lesson plans, quotes I wanted to remember. I brought several notebooks with me when I moved here, and I write in them most evenings. I write about my day, though there's rarely anything to say. I write memories from when my children were young, when they needed me, when I mattered. I write letters I'll never send, telling them things I'll never say out loud. Sometimes I write about Robert, my husband, the man I loved for 49 years. The man who died too young, too suddenly, leaving me alone in a world that no longer made sense. He had a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in March, 5 years ago. He was 69. We were supposed to grow old together. We were supposed to retire and travel and spoil our grandchildren and sit on our porch in the evenings, holding hands, watching the sunset. We were supposed to have more time. But we didn't, and when he died, something in me died too. The part that believed in happy endings. The part that believed love was enough. The part that believed the people you love will never leave you. My children supported me after Robert died, they did. Patricia handled the funeral arrangements. James managed the finances. Daniel flew home and stayed for a week. They were present, they were helpful, they grieved with me. But then they went back to their lives, and I was alone with my grief, and the distance between us started to grow. I needed them more than they wanted to be needed. I called too often. I asked too much. I became the burden I swore I'd never be. Or maybe I'm wrong about that too. Maybe the distance was always there, and Robert's death just made it visible. Maybe I only saw what I wanted to see when he was alive. Maybe my children tolerated me for his sake, and when he was gone, they had no reason to pretend anymore. I wish I could ask them. I wish I could have an honest conversation about what happened, about when and why and how we ended up here. but I can't. Because they don't visit. Because when they do, the visits are brief and surface level, all cheerful questions and vague answers, no depth, no honesty, no real connection. And because I'm afraid of what they might say if I asked, I'm afraid they'd tell me I was a terrible mother. I'm afraid they'd tell me I'm remembering everything wrong. I'm afraid they'd tell me they never loved me at all. So I say nothing. I smile when they visit. I ask about their lives. I tell them I'm fine, I'm doing great. The food is good, the staff is wonderful. I'm making friends. All lies, all designed to make them feel better about leaving me here. All designed to keep them from seeing how much it hurts. Yesterday was my birthday. December 16th, I turned 72. I didn't tell anyone here. I've learned that nursing home birthday celebrations are depressing affairs, a store-bought cake, off-key singing by strangers, forced cheer that makes you feel more alone than you did before. So I kept quiet. Patricia called, a 5-minute phone call. She sounded distracted. She said she was sorry she couldn't visit, things were crazy with the kids, maybe next week. She didn't mention my birthday until the end of the call, like she'd almost forgotten. Oh, and happy birthday, Mom, we love you. Then she was gone. James sent a text. Happy birthday. Hope you have a great day, talk soon. 3 sentences, 22 words, that's what my birthday was worth to him. Daniel didn't call, didn't text. Nothing. I sat in my room all day, I read, I wrote. I looked out the window at the parking lot and tried not to cry. I failed. At dinner, Dorothy asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine. She looked at me for a long moment, then said, liar. But she didn't push. That's the thing about Dorothy. She understands that sometimes you need to lie, even to yourself, just to get through the day. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I had a thought. A dangerous thought. A thought that's been growing in the back of my mind for months, but I've been too afraid to acknowledge. What if I stopped waiting? What if I stopped hoping? What if I accepted that this is my life now, this room, this routine, this loneliness, and I found a way to make peace with it? What if I let go of the fantasy that my children would suddenly remember they had a mother, that they'd show up and apologize and make everything right? What if I stopped defining my worth by whether or not they loved me? What if I mattered, even if they didn't think so? It's a radical thought. It goes against everything I've ever believed about family, about motherhood, about what it means to be a good person. But lying there in the dark, I felt something shift inside me. Not acceptance exactly, not peace, but something. A tiny ember of anger, maybe, or pride, or self-preservation. I taught for 43 years. I shaped young minds. I made a difference in hundreds of lives. I have letters proving it. I was good at what I did. I was important. Not because of my children, but because of me. Because of my work, my dedication, my passion. I mattered then. Why don't I matter now? Because I'm old? Because I'm in a nursing home? Because my children don't visit? None of those things erase who I was, what I accomplished, the lives I touched. None of those things make me worthless. So why do I feel worthless? I don't have an answer yet, but I'm starting to think the question itself matters. I fell asleep that night with that thought still burning in my mind. When I woke up this morning, it was still there, stronger, if anything. An ember becoming a flame. Something is changing, I can feel it. I don't know what it is yet or where it will lead. But for the first time in 14 months, I feel something other than sadness. I feel curiosity. I feel determination. I feel like maybe, just maybe, this story isn't over yet. I spent 43 years teaching students that they had voices worth hearing. Maybe it's time I remembered I have one too. There's a moment in every semester, usually around October, when a student would come to my classroom after school and sit in the chair next to my desk and tell me something they'd been carrying alone. A secret, a fear, a truth they didn't know how to speak out loud. I learned to recognize that moment, the way they'd hover in the doorway, the way their voice would shake when they finally started talking, the way they'd look anywhere except at my face. I learned to listen, not to fix, not to advise, just to listen, to let them speak their truth and know they'd been heard. That's all most people need, to be heard, to matter. Nobody's listening to me now, but maybe that's because I haven't been speaking. I'm Margaret Eleanor Hayes. I'm 72 years old. I'm sitting in room 237 of Harmony Hills Senior Living Center, and I'm done being invisible. I don't know what happens next, but I know it starts with me deciding I'm worth more than this. More than waiting for people who won't come. More than shrinking into silence. More than letting other people's indifference define my value. I taught thousands of students. I changed lives. I mattered. I still matter. That's what I'm holding on to today. It's not much. But it's something. And right now, something is more than I had yesterday. The first thing I did was stop lying. It sounds simple, but it wasn't. I'd been lying for so long that I'd almost forgotten what the truth looked like. Every time someone asked about my family, I smiled and said they were doing well, very busy, so proud of them. Every time a nurse commented on how quiet my phone was, I made excuses. Work obligations, family commitments. You know how it is. The lies came automatically, protective shields against pity and judgment and my own humiliation. But that morning, after my birthday, when the nurse came in with my medication and asked cheerfully if I had any visitors planned for the week, I said no. My children don't visit. The nurse, whose name was Ashley, stopped mid-pour with the little paper cup of pills in her hand. She looked at me with surprise and something else. Discomfort, maybe. People don't know what to do with honesty about abandonment. It makes them uncomfortable. It reminds them of their own failures, their own elderly relatives they don't visit enough, their own guilt. Oh, Ashley said. Well, I'm sure they're just busy, I finished. Yes. They're very busy, too busy to visit their mother who's been here for over a year. Too busy to call more than once a month. Too busy to remember my birthday. Ashley's eyes widened. She handed me the pills without another word, watched me swallow them, then left quickly. She didn't ask about my family again. Word spread, as it does in places like this. The nurses started treating me differently. Not unkindly but carefully, like I was fragile or unstable. They asked how I was feeling more often. They lingered in my room a few seconds longer than necessary. They meant well, but it wasn't what I wanted. I didn't need sympathy, I needed something else entirely, though I wasn't sure what yet. Dorothy noticed the change immediately. She was waiting in the courtyard when I came down for my morning routine, sitting in her usual spot with her mystery novel and contraband cigarettes. You look different, she said when I sat down on the bench near hers. Do I? Yeah. Less pathetic. I laughed. With anyone else that would have been an insult. From Dorothy it was a compliment. I decided to stop pretending my children give a damn about me, I said. Dorothy lit a cigarette and regarded me through the smoke. Good. Took you long enough? Was it obvious? Sweetheart, everyone here is pretending something. You weren't special. We sat in silence for a while. It was late December now, cold enough that we both wore heavy coats, but the morning sun was bright and the air was still. I watched other residents moving slowly through the courtyard, some with walkers, some in wheelchairs pushed by aides. Most of them looked lost, untethered. Like they were waiting for permission to stop existing. What made you stop? Dorothy asked eventually. Stop what? Stop pretending. Stop waiting. What changed? I thought about it. My birthday. I turned 72 and my children barely acknowledged it. I spent the whole day alone, waiting for something that never came, and I realized I've been waiting for 14 months, waiting for them to remember me. Waiting for them to feel guilty enough to visit. Waiting for my life to start mattering again. And I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of measuring my worth by whether or not they show up. I spent my whole life being useful, being needed. I taught hundreds of students. I raised 3 children. I was a good wife, a good mother, a good teacher. I mattered. And then I came here, and suddenly none of that counted anymore. Suddenly I was just an old woman nobody wanted. Dorothy exhaled smoke slowly. So what are you going to do about it? I don't know yet. Well, figure it out. Because the alternative is sitting in that room until you die, getting more bitter every day, turning into one of those people who yells at the staff and complains about the food and makes everyone miserable. Trust me, I've thought about it. It's tempting. But it's also pathetic. Thanks for the pep talk. You want a pep talk? Go to chair yoga. You want the truth? Talk to me. I smiled despite myself. Dorothy was caustic and difficult and completely impossible, but she was also the only person here who treated me like I still had a brain and a spine. "I'm serious though," she said, stubbing out her cigarette. "You're at a crossroads. You can either accept that this is how it ends, or you can do something about it. But you can't do both." "Do something like what?" "Hell if I know. That's your job to figure out. But I'll tell you this, you were a teacher for 43 years. You spent your whole life helping other people figure their shit out. Maybe it's time you used those skills on yourself." She picked up her book and started reading, conversation over. I sat there for another 20 minutes thinking about what she'd said. Thinking about crossroads and choices and what it means to take control of your own story when everyone else has written you off. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went to the library. The library at Harmony Hills is a small room on the first floor, lined with donated books and smelling of old paper and furniture polish. Nobody uses it much. Most residents prefer the television or sleep or staring into space. But I'd always loved libraries, loved the quiet promise of them, the idea that between those covers was every answer you could possibly need if you just knew where to look. I wasn't looking for answers exactly, I was looking for something, a direction, a purpose, a reason to care about waking up tomorrow. I browsed the shelves slowly. Romance novels with cracked spines, thrillers from the 90s, self-help books about living your best life and finding inner peace. Nothing spoke to me. Nothing felt right. Then I saw it. A small book with a blue cover, wedged between a cookbook and someone's ancient Bible. The title was embossed in gold. The Examined Life, Reflections on Aging, Legacy, and Worth. I pulled it out. The author was someone I'd never heard of, a philosophy professor from a university back east. I flipped through the pages. The writing was clear and intelligent, asking questions instead of providing answers. Questions about what makes a life meaningful, about how we measure success, about what we owe ourselves versus what we owe others, about dignity and agency and choosing how your story ends. I checked it out. There's actually a checkout system, a little card and everything, though I was probably the first person to use it in months, and took it back to my room. I read it cover to cover that night. Then I read it again. Some passages I read 3 or 4 times, underlining them with a pencil, writing notes in the margins the way I used to annotate books for my classes. One passage in particular struck me. It was about invisible labor, about how women especially spend their lives giving and nurturing and sacrificing, and how that labor is simultaneously demanded and dismissed, expected and unappreciated. The author wrote, "We are taught that our worth lies in our usefulness to others. But what happens when those others no longer need us? Do we become worthless? Or do we finally get to define our own value?" I sat with that question for a long time. My whole life had been about being useful, a useful wife, a useful mother, a useful teacher. I built my identity around service, around being needed. And when I wasn't needed anymore, when my children grew up and my husband died and I retired, I lost myself. I became a ghost haunting my own life, waiting for someone to need me again so I could remember who I was. But that was backwards, wasn't it? My worth didn't come from other people, it came from me. From my intelligence, my compassion, my decades of hard work. From the students whose lives I changed. From the lessons I taught, the books I loved, the person I was when nobody was watching. I mattered because I existed. Not because my children visited or called or remembered my birthday. I mattered because I was Margaret Eleanor Hayes, and I had lived a life of purpose and meaning, and nobody could take that away from me. Not even them. It sounds obvious when I write it now, but in that moment, sitting in my room at midnight with a borrowed book in my lap, it felt like a revelation. I started writing. Not in my journal this time, but on loose paper, thoughts flowing faster than I could capture them. I wrote about my teaching career, about specific students I remembered, specific lessons that worked, specific moments when I knew I'd made a difference. I wrote about the awards I'd won, the recognition I'd received, the respect I'd earned. I wrote about who I was before I became invisible. And then I wrote about my children. Not the sanitized version I'd been telling myself for months, but the truth, the whole complicated truth. I loved them, I still love them. But they had hurt me. Deeply, and pretending that hurt didn't exist wasn't protecting them. It was diminishing me. Patricia, my oldest, responsible and organized and completely ruled by shoulds and musts. She put me here because it was practical, because it checked a box, because she could tell herself she'd done the right thing. But she never asked what I wanted. Never considered that there might be alternatives. Never thought about what it would mean for me to leave my home, my independence, my whole life. She made the decision that was easiest for her and told herself it was for my own good. James, the middle child, charming and busy and forever finding reasons to delay, to postpone, to promise later. He loved me in theory but couldn't be bothered in practice. His work was always more important, his stress was always more urgent, his life was always too full to make room for his mother. He texted instead of visiting because texting was easy, required nothing of him, let him feel like he was maintaining the relationship without actually doing so. And Daniel. My baby. The one who lived furthest away and used that distance as an excuse. He called sometimes, but the calls were performative, obligatory. He asked how I was but didn't wait for real answers. He talked about his job, his wife, his kids, filling the silence with words that meant nothing. He visited twice since I moved here. Twice in 14 months. Both times felt like he was checking off a duty, fulfilling a requirement, counting down the minutes until he could leave. I wrote it all down. Every hurt, every disappointment, every moment of feeling invisible. I didn't write it to send to them. I wasn't that brave or that cruel. I wrote it because I needed to admit it to myself. I needed to stop making excuses for them. They were adults, they made choices. Those choices hurt me. That was the truth. The other truth, the one that took me longer to see, their choices didn't define me, their neglect didn't erase my value, their inability to love me the way I needed to be loved said more about them than it did about me. I had been a good mother. I had given them everything I had. If that wasn't enough for them, if they needed more or different or nothing at all, that was on them. Not me. It wasn't my fault. I wrote that sentence at the bottom of the page, underlined it 3 times. It wasn't my fault. When I finally stopped writing, it was past 2 in the morning. My hand ached, my eyes burned. But I felt lighter than I had in months, maybe years. I slept better that night than I had since moving here. No nightmares. No waking up at 3 a.m., heart pounding, thinking about everything I'd lost. Just sleep, deep and dreamless and restorative. The next morning, I had a plan. I went down to breakfast early, before the rush. The dining room at Harmony Hills is large and institutional, with round tables covered in plastic tablecloths and chairs that scrape too loudly against the linoleum. I usually ate quickly and left, avoiding conversation. But today I took my time. I looked around at the other residents, really looked. There were about 30 people in the room. Most stayed in silence, mechanically staring at nothing. A few talked quietly to each other or to the aides who helped them. Everyone looked tired. Defeated. Like they were going through the motions of living without remembering why. But not everyone. There was a man in the corner, probably in his 80s, reading the newspaper while he ate. He was dressed neatly, shirt tucked in, hair combed. He held himself differently than the others. Not slumped, not resigned. There was a woman 2 tables over, younger than most residents here, maybe late 60s. She had a notebook next to her plate, and was writing while she ate, focused and intent. There was another woman, heavy-set and laughing at something the aide serving her had said. Her whole face lit up with genuine amusement. These people hadn't given up. They were still here, still present, still engaged with being alive. Could I be one of them? After breakfast I went back to the library. There was a computer there, old and slow but functional. I hadn't used it before, I hadn't needed to, but I needed to now. I spent 2 hours researching. Looking up information about nursing home advocacy, about residents' rights, about activities and programs that some facilities offered. I read articles about aging and dignity and autonomy. I read about people who found purpose and meaning in their final years, who refused to be sidelined or silenced or forgotten. And I started to form a plan. If my children weren't going to give my life meaning, I would. If I couldn't leave this place, and realistically at 72 with limited savings and no family support, I probably couldn't, then I would change what this place meant. I would make it somewhere I wanted to be, not just somewhere I was stuck. I'd been a teacher for 43 years. I knew how to create community, how to inspire engagement, how to make people care about things they didn't know they cared about. Why couldn't I do that here? I started small. That afternoon, I knocked on Dorothy's door. She answered in her bathrobe, cigarette in hand, looking annoyed. What? I want to start something, I said, a book club. For residents who can still read and think and have opinions. I'm tired of sitting in my room. I'm tired of being alone. I'm tired of acting like I'm already dead. Dorothy studied me for a long moment, then she smiled, actually smiled. I'd never seen her smile before. About damn time, she said. The book club was Dorothy's idea technically, though she'd never admit it. We held our first meeting on a Tuesday afternoon in early January. I'd spent the previous week preparing, doing things I hadn't done in over a year. I talked to people. I knocked on doors. I actually engaged with the world around me instead of hiding from it. I put up a notice in the rec room, though I knew most people wouldn't see it. The real recruiting happened face to face. I approached the man I'd seen reading the newspaper at breakfast. His name was William Chen, 83 years old, former engineer. He'd been here 3 years, ever since his wife died, and his son moved to Seattle for work. When I asked if he'd be interested in a book club, he looked at me like I'd offered him a lifeline. I haven't had an intelligent conversation in 2 years, he said. Yes, absolutely yes. The woman with the notebook was named Grace Morrison. 68. Early onset Parkinson's, still mentally sharp but physically limited. She'd been a journalist before the disease forced her to retire. She practically lit up when I mentioned reading and discussing books. I've been dying in here, she said. Nobody wants to talk about anything real. It's all weather and medication and what's on TV. I'd love a book club. I found 3 others. A retired librarian named Helen who was mostly deaf but could still read lips and participate if we spoke clearly. A former accountant named Robert who was hungry for intellectual stimulation. And a woman named Jean who'd been a social worker and still had that fierce protective energy about her, even at 76. 7 of us total, including Dorothy and me. Not a huge group, but enough. More importantly, we were all people who hadn't given up yet. People who still wanted to think, to engage, to matter. We met in a corner of the rec room on Tuesday afternoons at 2 o'clock, when most residents were napping and the staff was changing shifts. I'd chosen our first book carefully. The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. A story about memory, regret, dignity, and what we owe ourselves versus what we owe to duty and service. I thought it would resonate. It did. That first meeting we spent 2 hours talking, really talking. About the book, yes, but also about our lives, our regrets, our anger at being dismissed and discarded. William talked about how his son called once a month out of obligation, never asking questions, never listening to answers. Grace talked about how her daughters visited but treated her like she was already gone, talking over her, making decisions for her, acting like the Parkinsons had erased her intelligence along with her motor control. Helen, the retired librarian, had tears in her eyes when she said, I spent 40 years helping people find books, find information, find answers. I was good at it. I mattered to my community, and now I sit in a room by myself because my hearing aids don't work. Well, in groups, and everyone got tired of repeating themselves. Like I'm not worth the effort. Robert, the accountant, slammed his hand on the table. My daughter put me here when I was 73. 73. I was still working. Still sharp. But she got divorced and needed to sell my house to split assets with her ex-husband, so I had to go. Didn't matter what I wanted. Didn't matter that I was healthy and independent. She needed the money, so here I am. Jean, the social worker, spoke quietly but with steel in her voice. I spent my career protecting vulnerable people, children mostly, making sure they weren't abandoned or abused or neglected. And now, I'm the vulnerable one, and my own son thinks 2 visits a year is sufficient. The irony isn't lost on me. Dorothy, who'd been silent until then, said, We all got screwed. Our kids, our families, they all got what they needed from us, and then they moved on. We're the generation that sacrificed everything and got nothing. That's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. The room went quiet. Then William said, So what do we do about it? We stop pretending it's okay, I said. We stop making excuses for them. We stop shrinking ourselves to make them comfortable. We stop acting like we don't matter. That's nice in theory, Grace said. But practically speaking, we're stuck here. Most of us can't leave. We don't have the money, or the health, or the support. So what's the point of acknowledging how much this sucks if we can't change it? Maybe we can change it, I said, not the fact that we're here, but what being here means, how we're treated, how we treat ourselves. You want to start a revolution? Dorothy asked, smirking. I want to start living like we matter, I said. Even if nobody else thinks we do. We talked for another hour. By the end of that first meeting, we'd all agreed to keep meeting weekly. We'd all agreed to stop lying about our families, to each other, and to ourselves. And we'd all agreed to start paying attention to what was happening in this place, to how we were being treated, to whether the care we were receiving was actually in our best interest or just convenient for the staff. It wasn't a revolution exactly, but it was something. Over the next few weeks, the book club became the center of my life. We met every Tuesday without fail. We read and discussed books that mattered. Books about aging and dignity and resistance and resilience. We talked about our lives with an honesty I hadn't experienced since Robert died. We supported each other, we validated each other, we reminded each other that we were still human, still valuable, still here. And slowly, I started noticing things I'd been too depressed to notice before. I noticed that medication was often given late, or not at all, with no explanation or apology. I noticed that call buttons were frequently ignored, leaving residents waiting 20 or 30 minutes for help to the bathroom. I noticed that activities were canceled without notice, that promised outings never materialized, that complaints were met with placating smiles and nothing changed. I noticed that the food, which I'd accepted as merely institutional, was actually inadequate. Small portions, minimal nutrition, the same rotation of bland, overcooked meals week after week. Several residents, including William, had lost significant weight since arriving. Nobody seemed concerned. I noticed that our belongings went missing sometimes. Small things, photographs, books, items of clothing. When we reported it, we were told we must have misplaced them, that we were confused, that it happens with age. We were gaslit so smoothly we almost believed it. I noticed that some staff members were wonderful, genuinely caring, patient, respectful, but others were dismissive, rough, occasionally cruel in small ways. Speaking to us like we were children, handling us without gentleness, making us feel like burdens for having needs. And I noticed that there was no accountability. No oversight, no mechanism for residents to voice concerns or complaints that would actually be heard. We were powerless, and everyone knew it. At our 4th book club meeting, I brought this up. Has anyone else noticed issues with the care here? The floodgates opened. Everyone had stories. Grace talked about being left in soiled clothing for hours because the aide was too busy. Robert talked about his medication being wrong for 3 days before anyone corrected it. Helen talked about being mocked by a night nurse who thought she couldn't hear. Jean talked about witnessing an aide roughly grab another resident's arm and yank her out of bed. I tried to report it, Jean said. I filled out a complaint form, nothing happened. 2 weeks later, I saw the same aide doing the same thing to someone else. So what do we do? William asked. We're old, we're vulnerable, who's going to listen to us? Maybe nobody, I said, but maybe we need to try anyway. That's when things started to shift. When we stopped being just a book club and started being something else, a support group, an advocacy group, a resistance. Dorothy named it. We're the Invisibles, she said. People look right through us like we don't exist. But we do exist, and it's time people remembered that. The Invisibles, it fit. We started documenting everything. Grace, with her journalist background, showed us how to keep records, dates, times, specific incidents, names of staff involved. We started writing down every medication error, every ignored call button, every rough handling, every dismissive comment. We kept notebooks hidden in our rooms and compared notes at our meetings. We also started talking to other residents, carefully. We didn't want to scare anyone or get shut down by administration, but we asked questions, we listened. We found that our experiences weren't isolated, they were systemic. There was a woman named Martha on the second floor who'd fallen 3 times because her walker had broken wheels and maintenance kept saying they'd fix it but never did. There was a man named Frank who had diabetes and kept being served meals with too much sugar because the kitchen didn't track dietary restrictions properly. There was a woman named Susan whose family had set up a trust to pay for additional services, physical therapy, activities, outings, but those services were rarely provided and nobody told her family. The more we learned, the angrier I got. Not explosive anger, not the kind that burns hot and fades, but cold, sustained anger, the kind that clarifies, the kind that focuses. This place was taking advantage of vulnerable people. It was providing minimum care while charging maximum prices. It was betting that residents were too scared, too sick, too isolated, or too confused to speak up. It was counting on our invisibility. And it was probably getting away with it in dozens of other facilities too. Because who advocates for the elderly? Who checks on the forgotten? Who cares what happens to people society has already written off? At our 6th meeting, in mid-February, I laid out what I'd found: the pattern of neglect. The financial irregularities, the staff issues, the lack of oversight. We need to do something, I said. We need to report this to someone who will actually listen. Like who? Dorothy asked. The administration here won't listen. They're the problem, not them, I said. Outside, there are regulatory agencies, ombudsmen, organizations that oversee nursing homes. We need to file a formal complaint. They'll retaliate, Jean said quietly. Nursing homes always retaliate when residents complain. We could get kicked out. We could get labeled as troublemakers. The staff could make our lives hell. They could, I agreed. But they're already making our lives hell. We're just pretending they're not. William leaned forward. I'm in. I'm 83 years old. What are they going to do, kill me? I'd rather die fighting than die invisible. Grace nodded. I'm in too. I've spent my whole career exposing truth. I'm not going to stop now just because I'm on the other side of it. One by one they all agreed. Even Jean, though she was scared. Even Helen, who worried about retaliation. Even Robert, who just wanted peace and quiet but wanted justice more. Dorothy looked at me. You really want to do this? You want to take on this place? Because once we start, we can't stop halfway. We either go all the way, or we don't start at all. I want to do this, I said. I'm tired of being helpless. I'm tired of being ignored. I'm tired of acting like this is okay when it's not. My children abandoned me here. Fine, I can't control that. But I can control whether I just accept whatever happens to me, or whether I fight back. Then we fight, Dorothy said. We spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Grace drafted a formal complaint, 15 pages long, documenting every incident we'd recorded, every pattern of neglect, every failure to provide adequate care. She was meticulous, professional. She included dates, names, specific violations of state regulations. She attached photographs when we had them. Pictures of broken equipment, inadequate meals, safety hazards in common areas. William researched the regulatory process. He found the contact information for the Long-Term Care Ombudsman's Office, for the State Department of Health, for advocacy organizations. He created a list of everyone who needed to receive our complaint, and how to file it properly so it couldn't be ignored. Robert helped organize our financial documentation. He'd noticed that many residents, including himself, were being charged for services they weren't receiving. He suspected billing fraud. He couldn't prove it without access to the facility's books, but he documented enough discrepancies to raise serious questions. I wrote the cover letter. I explained who we were, why we were coming forward, what we'd witnessed. I wrote about dignity and rights and the responsibility we have to protect the vulnerable. I wrote like I used to write letters to parents of struggling students, clear, firm, impossible to dismiss. Jean helped us understand the legal protections we had. She'd worked with nursing home regulations in her social work career. She knew that residents had the right to file complaints without retaliation, that we had the right to meet privately, that we had the right to contact outside agencies. She also knew that retaliation happened anyway, that rights on paper didn't always translate to rights in practice, but knowing our rights gave us armor. Dorothy kept us grounded. When we got scared, when we second-guessed ourselves, when we wondered if we were making things worse, she reminded us why we were doing this. Not just for ourselves, for every resident here, for every person who would come after us, for everyone who'd ever been made to feel invisible. We filed the complaint on March 1st. We sent copies to 4 different agencies. We hand-delivered a copy to the facility administrator with all 7 of us present as witnesses. The administrator, a woman named Linda Peterson, who I'd barely interacted with in 14 months, looked at the complaint like we'd handed her a live grenade. Her smile, usually so professional and warm, vanished. "This is very serious," she said. "These are very serious allegations." "Yes, they are," I said. "And they're all true. I'll need to investigate." "They've already been investigated," Grace interrupted. "By us, for 2 months. Everything in that complaint is documented and factual." Linda's jaw tightened. "I appreciate your concerns, but I think there may be some misunderstandings. Sometimes residents perceive things differently than they actually happened." "Don't," Jean said sharply. "Don't insult us by suggesting we're confused or mistaken. We know exactly what we witnessed. We know exactly what we documented. And we know our rights." Linda looked at each of us in turn. I could see her recalculating, trying to figure out how to handle this. We were supposed to be easy, compliant, grateful. We weren't supposed to organize or research or fight back. "I'll review this thoroughly," she finally said, "and I'll be in touch." We left her office in silence. When we got back to the rec room, William said, "Well, we did it." "We did," I agreed. My hands were shaking. I felt exhilarated and terrified in equal measure. "What happens now?" Helen asked. "Now we wait," Grace said. "The agencies have 30 days to respond. They'll investigate. They'll interview residents and staff. They'll inspect the facility. And then they'll decide what actions to take." "And if they decide to do nothing?" Robert asked. "Then we go public," I said. "We contact the media. We tell our story. We make enough noise that they can't ignore us." Dorothy lit a cigarette even though we were inside, and it was against the rules. Nobody stopped her. "You know they're going to make our lives hell for this," she said. "Probably," I agreed. "Good," Dorothy said. "Let them try. I've been in hell for 3 years. At least now I'm fighting back." She was right. The retaliation started almost immediately. Subtle at first. Call buttons took longer to answer for our group than for other residents. Medication times became irregular. Small conveniences disappeared. The good seats in the rec room were suddenly always taken. Preferred meal times were mysteriously unavailable. Maintenance requests went unanswered. Then it got less subtle. Grace's physical therapy sessions were canceled without explanation. William's newspaper delivery stopped. Jean's family visit was interrupted by staff claiming there was an emergency, though there wasn't. Robert was told his room needed to be inspected for pests, an inspection that involved going through all his personal belongings, including the notebook where he kept our financial documentation. They were trying to intimidate us, to make us back down. It didn't work. If anything, it made us more determined. Every act of retaliation got documented and added to our ongoing complaint. Every attempt to silence us became more evidence that something was deeply wrong at Harmony Hills. The investigators came 3 weeks after we filed. 2 women from the Ombudsman's office, and an inspector from the Department of Health. They spent 4 days at the facility, interviewing residents and staff, reviewing records, inspecting every corner of the building. They interviewed each of us separately. When it was my turn, I sat in a small conference room with the lead investigator, a woman in her 40s named Sarah Chen, and I told her everything. Not just what was in the written complaint, but how it felt. What it was like to be invisible. What it was like to be dismissed and discarded. What it was like to have your humanity slowly stripped away by a system that saw you as a problem to be managed, not a person to be cared for. She listened. Really listened. She took notes. She asked follow-up questions. And when I finished, she said, "Thank you, for your courage. For speaking up. It matters." I cried then. I couldn't help it. Because someone had finally heard me. Someone finally believed that what happened to us mattered. The results of the investigation came 6 weeks later, in mid-April. 6 weeks of waiting, wondering, second-guessing ourselves. 6 weeks of continued retaliation that we documented meticulously. 6 weeks of the Invisibles meeting every Tuesday, supporting each other, refusing to back down. When the letter arrived, it was addressed to me. I don't know why they chose me as the primary contact. Maybe because I'd written the cover letter. Maybe because I was the one who'd spoken longest during the interview. Maybe it was random. But the envelope came to my room, official state letterhead, and my hands shook as I opened it. I read it once. Then again. Then I walked down the hall to Dorothy's room, knocked, and when she opened the door I said, "We won." She grabbed the letter from my hand and read it while I stood there trying to process what winning actually meant. The investigation had substantiated our complaints. Multiple violations of state regulations, inadequate staffing levels, improper medication management, insufficient nutrition, failure to maintain safe premises, lack of oversight and accountability. The facility was being fined. They were being placed on a corrective action plan with mandatory monitoring. They had 60 days to address all deficiencies or face potential closure. "Holy shit," Dorothy said. We called an emergency meeting of the Invisibles. All 7 of us crammed into Dorothy's room because it was bigger than mine. I read the letter aloud, all 4 pages of findings, and required corrections. When I finished, nobody spoke for a long moment. Then William started laughing. Deep, genuine laughter that turned into tears. Grace was crying too, but smiling. Jean kept saying we did it over and over like she couldn't quite believe it. Robert looked stunned. Helen, who'd had to read my lips the whole time, just nodded with this fierce satisfaction on her face. "What happens now?" Grace finally asked. "Now they have to change," I said. "They have to hire more staff. They have to fix the medication protocols. They have to improve the food. They have to create a real complaint process. They have to do all the things they should have been doing all along." "And if they don't?" William asked. "Then they get shut down," Dorothy said. She was still reading the letter, scanning the legal language. "It says here the state will conduct follow-up inspections. If they're not in compliance in 60 days, they lose their license to operate." "So we actually made a difference," Jean said quietly. "We actually changed something." "We did," I agreed. But even as I said it, even as we celebrated, I felt something shifting inside me. We'd won this fight. We'd proven we weren't powerless. We'd forced accountability. But the bigger question remained unanswered. What now? The facility did change grudgingly. New staff were hired within 2 weeks, younger aides who actually seemed to care, who treated us like people instead of burdens. The food improved dramatically. Real vegetables, properly cooked protein, meals that actually had flavor and nutrition. The medication cart started running on time. Call buttons were answered promptly. Broken equipment got fixed. Safety hazards were addressed. The administrator, Linda Peterson, avoided us completely. But the new director of nursing, a competent woman named Patricia Rodriguez, which made me laugh bitterly every time I heard her name, actually sought us out. She thanked us. She said the complaint had been a wake-up call, that the previous management had let standards slip, that she was committed to real change. I wanted to believe her. Parts of me did. But I'd also learned that institutional change is fragile. It lasts as long as someone is paying attention. Once the pressure eases, once the monitoring ends, things slip back to how they were. We'd won the battle, but the war was ongoing. The Invisibles kept meeting. Our book club continued, but it had evolved into something more. We'd become advocates not just for ourselves, but for every resident at Harmony Hills. We paid attention, we spoke up, we refused to be silent or compliant. We'd found our power, and we weren't giving it up. Other residents noticed. Some were grateful. They thanked us quietly for making things better. Others were resentful. We'd made waves, caused trouble, risked retaliation. They preferred the safety of silence. I understood. Not everyone wants to fight. Not everyone can. But some did. Gradually our group expanded. Martha, the woman whose walker had broken wheels, joined us. Then Frank, the diabetic man. Then 3 others who'd been too scared before but found courage in our success. By May, the Invisibles had grown to 13 members. We were becoming a real force within the facility. And then, in late May, something unexpected happened. My daughter Patricia called. I hadn't heard from her in 6 weeks. not since a brief text in March saying she was thinking of me. When her name appeared on my phone, I almost didn't answer. But curiosity, or maybe residual hope, made me pick up. "Mom," she said. Her voice was strange, tight. "I need to talk to you about something." "All right," I said carefully. "I got a call from the administrator at your facility, Linda Peterson. She said you filed a complaint, a formal complaint about the care there. She said it resulted in a state investigation." My stomach dropped. Of course. Of course the facility would reach out to families. Of course they'd try to control the narrative, make us look like troublemakers, protect their reputation. "Yes," I said, "I did. Why didn't you tell me?" Patricia's voice had that edge to it. The one she used when she was upset and trying not to show it. "Why didn't you say something if you were unhappy there? I could have helped. I could have looked into other facilities." "Patricia," I interrupted. "When's the last time you visited me?" Silence. I've been busy, Mom, you know that. Work, and the kids, and 6 months, I said. "You haven't visited in 6 months. You've called maybe 4 times. Brief calls, surface-level calls. You ask how I am, but you don't wait for real answers. So no, I didn't tell you about the problems here. Because you weren't here to tell." More silence. "Then, that's not fair, isn't it? Patricia, you put me here. You made that decision for me. You said it was for my own good. That I'd be safe. That you'd visit often. But you didn't visit. None of you did. James came twice in 14 months. Daniel once. You stopped by occasionally but never stayed, never really talked to me. You all moved on with your lives, and left me here to rot." "Mom, we didn't abandon you, life is complicated, and—" "I know life is complicated," I said. My voice was calm, which surprised me. I'd expected anger, but what I felt was clarity. "I raised 3 children while working full-time. I nursed your father through his final illness. I understand complicated, but complicated isn't an excuse for disappearing. Complicated isn't an excuse for making me invisible." "You're not invisible," Patricia said, but her voice wavered. "Yes, I was. To you, to your brothers, to everyone. I sat in my room for months waiting for you to visit, making excuses for why you didn't, telling myself you still cared. I measured my worth by whether or not you showed up. And you know what I finally realized? That was killing me. Waiting for you to remember I existed was slowly destroying me." "So you filed a complaint against the facility instead of calling me?" Patricia sounded defensive now, hurt. "I filed a complaint because the facility was providing inadequate care and taking advantage of vulnerable people. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I did it because I still matter. Even if you don't think I do." "I never said you don't matter. You didn't have to say it. You showed me. For 14 months, you showed me exactly how much I matter to you." Patricia was crying now. I could hear it in her breathing. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to take it back, to make it easier. That's what I'd always done. Smooth things over. Made everyone comfortable. Put their feelings ahead of my own. But I didn't. I let her cry. I let the silence stretch between us. Finally she said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. You're right. We should have visited more. We should have paid attention. I should have." "Yes," I said simply. "You should have. Can I come see you? Tomorrow? I want to talk about this. I want to make it right." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, to grab onto this olive branch. To believe that everything could be fixed with one conversation. But I'd learned something these past few months. I'd learned that I didn't need their validation to have value. I'd learned that I could survive without them. I'd learned that their presence in my life was a privilege, not a right. "You can come," I said. "But I need you to understand something first. I'm not the same person I was when I moved here. I'm not going to pretend everything is fine. I'm not going to make this easy for you. And I'm not going to forgive 14 months of neglect just because you finally felt guilty enough to show up." "Okay," Patricia whispered. "Okay." She came the next day, Saturday afternoon. She looked tired and older than I remembered. She brought flowers, which felt performative, but I accepted them. We sat in my room, and for the first time in over a year, we had a real conversation. She cried a lot. She apologized repeatedly. She tried to explain the stress of her job, problems with her marriage I hadn't known about, her daughter's struggles in school, feeling overwhelmed and inadequate. I listened. I didn't excuse her, but I listened. I convinced myself you were fine, she said. I convinced myself that you were being taken care of, that you didn't really need us, that we could visit when things calmed down. And things never calmed down, and I just kept telling myself next week, next month, soon. I didn't let myself think about what it was like for you here. Because if I thought about it, I'd have to admit I was failing you. You were failing me, I said. She flinched but nodded. I know I was. And I'm so sorry. I need more than sorry, Patricia. I need to know that you understand what you did. You took away my home, my independence, my life. You put me somewhere and forgot about me. Do you have any idea what that felt like? How small I felt? How worthless? I didn't mean to make you feel that way, but you did. Your intentions don't erase the impact. We sat in silence for a while. Then Patricia said, "Tell me about the complaint. About what happened here. I want to understand." So I told her. Everything. The neglect, the inadequate care, the way residents were treated, how we organized, how we fought back, how we won. I told her about the invisibles, about finding my power again, about remembering that I mattered. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "I'm proud of you. I know I have no right to be, but I am. You did something really brave." I did something necessary, I corrected. Because no one else was going to do it for us. We were on our own. "You're not on your own anymore," Patricia said. "I'm here. I'm going to do better, I promise." "Don't make promises you can't keep," I said. "Just do better, show up, be present. Treat me like I'm still your mother, not an obligation you resent." "I don't resent you," she said quickly. "Maybe not, but you definitely resented having to think about me, having to deal with me, having to fit me into your busy life. I became a burden you wanted to set down." She didn't deny it. That, more than anything, told me she was being honest. Before she left, she asked if I wanted to come to her house for dinner the following Sunday. A family dinner. Her and her husband and kids, James and his family, and she'd call Daniel and see if he could video chat in. I almost said yes. The old Margaret would have said yes immediately, grateful for the invitation, eager to be included. But I wasn't the old Margaret anymore. "Let me think about it," I said. She looked hurt but nodded. "Okay, I understand." After she left, I sat in my room for a long time thinking about forgiveness and boundaries and what I owed to myself versus what I owed to family. About whether people could change, or whether they just promised to and then slowly slipped back to who they'd always been. I didn't have answers. But I had something I didn't have before, the knowledge that my worth wasn't contingent on their love. I mattered whether they showed up or not. I had purpose and meaning that existed independently of them. The Invisibles met that Tuesday. I told them about Patricia's visit, about her apology, about the dinner invitation. "Are you going to go?" Grace asked. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to. Part of me wants to believe she'll actually change, that this is a new beginning. But another part of me knows that people rarely change. They make promises when confronted with their failures. But old patterns are comfortable. She'll visit for a few weeks, maybe a few months. And then life will get busy again, and I'll be back where I started. "So what are you going to do?" William asked. "I'm going to decide based on what I want, not what she needs from me. If I go to dinner, it'll be because I want to, not because I'm afraid of losing them. I've already lost them. They lost me. The question now is whether we can build something new, something real, and I won't know that until I see if her actions match her words." Dorothy, who'd been quiet, spoke up. "You know what I think? I think you've already won. Not because you forced them to apologize or come back, but because you don't need them to. You found yourself again. You found your power. Whether they're in your life or not, you're going to be okay. That's the real victory." She was right. I knew she was right. Over the next few weeks, something unexpected happened. Patricia did show up, every week, sometimes twice a week. She brought her kids. She stayed longer than a few minutes. She asked real questions and waited for real answers. She met the other Invisibles. She thanked them for being there for me when she wasn't. James started visiting too, less regularly but more meaningfully. He admitted he'd been avoiding coming because seeing me here made him feel guilty. He said he was working on that, on being able to sit with uncomfortable feelings instead of running from them. Daniel called more often and actually listened. He said he was looking into coming home for a visit, bringing his family, staying for a week instead of a weekend. I didn't know if it would last. I didn't trust it completely. But I appreciated it, and I let myself enjoy it without needing it, because here's what I'd learned. I had built a life here. Not the life I wanted, not the life I'd imagined, but a life with meaning and purpose. The Invisibles had become my community. Our advocacy work had become my mission. I was teaching again, in a way, teaching people that they mattered, that they had rights, that they could fight back. I was making a difference. The facility continued to improve. The new staff stayed. The better food remained. The accountability structures we demanded were implemented. We'd created lasting change, not just for ourselves but for everyone here and everyone who would come after us. In June, a reporter from the local newspaper contacted me. She'd heard about our complaint and the investigation, and she wanted to write a story about elderly advocacy and the importance of speaking up. I agreed to be interviewed. So did the other Invisibles. The article ran in July. It was front page. The Invisibles, How 7 Nursing Home Residents Changed Everything. It told our story with respect and dignity. It quoted us extensively. It included our real names and our photographs. We became briefly famous in our small way. Other facilities reached out, asking how we'd organized. Advocacy groups contacted us. Several residents from other nursing homes wrote to say we'd inspired them to speak up about problems at their facilities. We'd started something. Something bigger than us. Something that mattered. My children saw the article. They read about what I'd done, what I'd accomplished, who I'd become. Patricia called me crying, saying she was proud. James posted it on Facebook with a caption about his amazing mother. Daniel sent it to his colleagues, bragging that his mom was a badass. It felt good, I won't lie. Their pride mattered to me, even though I'd worked hard not to need it. But here's the thing, I'd have done it anyway. With or without their approval, with or without their pride, I'd have fought this fight. Because it was right, because I mattered, because we all mattered. It's September now. I've been at Harmony Hills for 2 years. The facility is barely recognizable from when I arrived. The care is better. The staff is better. The residents are more empowered. We have a residents' council now, one with actual authority. We have regular meetings with administration. We have a voice. The Invisibles still meet every Tuesday. We still read books and discuss ideas and support each other. But we've also become mentors to new residents, helping them navigate this place, reminding them of their rights, showing them they don't have to accept whatever is done to them. Dorothy and I still sit in the courtyard most mornings. She still smokes her contraband cigarettes and reads her mysteries. But now we talk about what we're going to do next, what changes we want to push for, what battles are worth fighting. You ever regret it? She asked me last week. Starting all this? It would have been easier to just keep your head down. Easier isn't always better, I said. No, she agreed. It's not. My children visit regularly now. Not as often as I once wanted, but enough. We're rebuilding our relationships slowly, honestly. I've told them what I need from them. Real presence, not performative visits. They're trying. Some days are better than others, but we're all trying, and that's something. I still write in my journal every evening. But now I write different things. Not just memories and regrets, but plans and observations and reflections on meaning and purpose. I write about the students I taught, and the lessons they learned, and the ways those lessons still matter. I write about resilience and resistance and refusing to be diminished. I write about what it means to matter when society says you don't. What it means to find your voice after decades of silence. What it means to fight for dignity in a world that would rather you quietly disappear. Last week a new resident moved in. A woman named Eleanor, 75 years old, former nurse. Her daughter dropped her off and left within an hour. I recognized the look on Eleanor's face, lost, abandoned, invisible. I remembered that look because I'd worn it for months. I knocked on her door that evening. I introduced myself. I invited her to sit with me in the courtyard the next morning, to join the Invisibles on Tuesday, to remember that being here didn't mean her life was over. You matter, I told her. Even when it doesn't feel like it. Even when everyone else seems to have forgotten, you matter, and we're going to make sure you never forget that. She cried. Then she thanked me. Then she asked how she could help, what she could do, how she could contribute. That's when I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't just about my children, or my hurt, or my need to feel valued. It was about creating a community where being elderly didn't mean being powerless, where being vulnerable didn't mean being voiceless, where needing care didn't mean surrendering dignity. We'd started something here, something important. Something that would outlast all of us. I'm 72 years old, I live in a nursing home. My children abandoned me here, though they're slowly finding their way back. I've lost so much, my husband, my home, my independence, years of my life to loneliness and invisibility. But I've also gained something. I've gained purpose. I've gained community. I've gained the knowledge that I can still make a difference, still matter, still change the world in small but meaningful ways. I taught English literature for 43 years. I taught comma splices and dangling modifiers. But mostly I taught young people how to find their voices, how to speak their truths, how to stand tall even when the world tried to make them small. I never imagined I'd need to teach myself those same lessons at 72. But I did. And I'm grateful for it. Because here's what I know now, your worth isn't determined by other people. Not by your children. Not by your family, not by society. Your worth is intrinsic. It exists because you exist. And no one has the right to make you invisible. I matter, we all matter. The invisibles matter. And we're not invisible anymore. This morning I woke up in room 237. The same room with pale yellow walls and a window overlooking the parking lot. The same room I've lived in for 2 years. But it doesn't feel the same. Because I'm not the same. I got up. I took my medication. I ate breakfast with the invisibles, laughing at one of William's terrible jokes. I helped Eleanor fill out paperwork to join the Residents' Council. I spent an hour on the phone with a reporter from a national magazine who wants to do a feature on elderly advocacy. I read 3 chapters of our current book club selection. I called Patricia and told her I'd come to dinner on Sunday, but only if she was cooking, not ordering takeout. I lived, fully, purposefully, meaningfully. Tonight, I'll write in my journal. I'll document today, the small victories, the moments of connection, the quiet joy of mattering. And tomorrow, I'll wake up and do it all again. Because I'm not waiting anymore. I'm not hoping for rescue. I'm not measuring my worth by visits that may or may not come. I'm living the life I have, right here, right now. And it's not the life I imagined. It's not the life I wanted. But it's mine, and it matters. I matter, and that's enough.